Hi, I'm Mike.
And I'm Aaron.
And you're listening to Thought Fuzz,
The only podcast hosted by Mike and Aaron, where we debate the big ideas behind the big issues you're debating today.
This week, we're discussing...
Does politics need love?
I've never really got the whole WWE thing. Like, I don't even know why people like it. Like, what even is it?
So, the WWE is a marriage between sports and entertainment. It's what Vince McMahon calls sports entertainment.
No, but I don't understand what element of it is a sport. I mean, if I sport...
It isn't a sport. Wrestling, in terms of the WWE, is not strictly speaking a sport, but it is athletic.
Sure.
It's more in line with the circus, and
Right.
I don't mean that disparagingly. I mean that you in the same way that people who work in a circus are clearly athletically gifted.
Yeah, and they have specialized skills to perform a specialized routine,
Right.
which people come to see and is,
Right.
Yeah, right. I see.
It's like that.
Right. Okay.
But on top of that,
Okay.
there's a story element which keeps you tuning in each week.
I guess so. You mean kind of like how the Cirque du Soleil has a theme for their acts, kind of like a hook,
Yes.
a hook for the audience. Like this act is going to be about.
Yeah, but unlike Cirque du Soleil, it's a like a television show. It's got a plot. It's
Right.
got character arcs.
Right.
It's got subplots, main plots. There's a lot going on when you watch wrestling. Wrestling, in terms of like the WWE, is a weirdly intricate entertainment.
I just find it very bizarre.
Well, you're coming at this from the perspective, to be clear, of somebody who
Oh no, for sure. Yeah.
actually used to wrestle,
Well, still.
and somebody who still performs martial arts.
Oh, well, yeah. You mean if I used to wrestle, you mean wrestle in competition? Like,
Right.
I got thrown around in practice just the other day by a colleague of mine. But no, I take your point. I'm not the typical audience for wrestling. Though I will say that I do train around circus performers and specifically aerialists.
Right.
And I have nothing but the highest respect for those people because I see what they're doing. Like I see how their acting is built from the ground up.
Yeah.
And the kind of the athletic feats they're doing on these flying trapezes and these silks and these hoops and stuff is incredible.
Right.
Right. And I guess maybe if I saw WWE guys rehearsing their lines, I'd respect them more. I don't know. I guess it's just something that I don't enjoy and I have to be happy with.
I used to feel that way. I don't personally follow wrestling, but I've been to see wrestling pay-per-view events at movie theaters before. I don't think they still do this anymore, but they used to, where you could go buy a $20 ticket and see on the big screen a wrestling event like SummerSlam or WrestleMania.
They might do. Maybe probably in America more than Canada.
They used to do it in Canada.
Oh, did they? Oh.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to watch because it was unlike any other theater going experience you've ever had. It's not like going to see I don't know, a Marvel movie or something where everyone's quiet in the theater and watching it and the lights are dark or turned off. They kept the house lights on. Oh. People are talking at room volume.
Oh.
Or just shouting at the screen.
Oh.
People, because it goes on for like 3 or 4 hours, you can just get up and go and come back in at different points. So people would go out for like smoke breaks and things like that, or they'd go and
while The Rock is beating somebody's head against.
No. They would. The crowd really filters out during what's called a diva fight. So in wrestling, you've got your male wrestlers, but you've also got your female wrestlers, and I suppose this is changing now, but it used to be that the female wrestlers were labeled divas, so they would get into a fight with each other and they'd be wearing basically bikinis.
Isn't there like a Netflix show about that?
Yeah, that's called Glow, but that's different. There was a Glorious Ladies of Wrestling League.
Oh, that's
think
what
that
that means.
Or Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. I can't remember what the G stands for, but it was a wrestling league in the 1980s, and this is sort of a comedy based on it. But that's not WWE. But it is very, I suppose you can draw a kind of ideal line from something like that league in the 1980s to the modern incarnation of the wrestling diva. Certainly. I don't know. I haven't been paying attention to the WWE in some time, so I can't say for sure what's going on now. But I suspect that with people like Ronda Rousey making such a name for themselves in UFC, because
she's I think she's drifting away from professional mixed martial arts now.
Right, she's becoming an actor.
Yeah, an actor, and I did actually hear a rumor about her having something to do with professional wrestling of some kind or something. So.
Well, anybody in the UFC who kind of ages out of the UFC, I suppose, or just doesn't want to take that kind of punishment anymore, can find a renewed career.
I suppose.
I think Dave Batista, wasn't he originally a UFC guy?
There have been some transitions from the UFC.
Yeah. Brock Lesnar has bounced back and forth.
That's right. He's one of the more famous examples. Yeah.
Yeah. There are a couple of other guys like that who went from UFC to WWE or vice versa. It tends to be the case, this is just a minor point, but it tends to be the case that if you start in UFC and go to WWE, that you're more successful than the person who starts in WWE and goes to UFC.
Curious.
Yeah.
Curious. Now, so what's this thing about heels and toes? What is it?
No. So in wrestling, you've got your heroes and villains, but they don't call them heroes and villains. The technical term is faces and heels. Faces being your heroes. They're like the face of the company. They're like they tend to be better looking. They tend to be they have a look to them. And then you've got your heels, and they've also got something of a look. So in addition to your faces and heels, you have something called a face turn or a heel turn. So that's when you become either a face or you become a heel. So some wrestlers like The Rock, he used to be a heel. He would come to your city and trash talk you and then beat up on your local hero. And then he became a face when he got really, really popular. Meanwhile, there are other guys who have oscillated back and forth between being a face and being a heel. So someone like The Undertaker, I'm sure you're familiar with The Undertaker, at least notionally.
Yeah, like you have to. The Undertaker is involved with the
wrestler,
the funeral arrangements of
the wrestler,
dearly departed. Wait, there's a wrestler called The Undertaker?
Yeah, you know The Undertaker.
Oh,
the guy with
Can you smell what The Undertaker's cooking?
No, that's The Rock.
Wait, what?
The Rock says, "Can you smell what The Rock is cooking?"
Wait, The Rock cooks?
No.
Wouldn't that be like the chef?
I don't like this bit.
I'm confused.
So how did I get onto the topic?
Well, you look kind of like a heel to me. I don't know. Is that?
No. If I was a wrestler, make no mistake about it, I would be a heel. I would be a heel hard. There's no way they would make me a face.
No.
I'd come in there wearing a sports jacket and a V-neck sweater and an Oxford cloth shirt and some sensible pants. And
with like a blowpipe in your pocket or something?
Yeah.
With like pain poison in it or something?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Called The Professor.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And it would just be a great way to beat up on nerds. And I just get my ass kicked every match.
Until you tap in like your friend Kronk, who's like a 7-foot tall Icelandic Viking.
Oh yeah, no. It would be a real brains and
brawn thing.
Yeah, because in wrestling you also have teams and duos and things like that because they like to pair different wrestlers with each other to like I think at one point The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin had a bit of a relationship going.
Oh, is that so?
Yeah. Before The Rock really took off.
Did TMZ find out, or like?
Not that kind of relationship. No, I mean, they were like a friendship. Right. They were allies. I think, if I remember that correctly. And then you've also got other teams like Generation X was one of them, and Yeah. So there's or the Shield, I think, is another one, if I remember correctly. I don't know too much about wrestling, so whoever's listening to this is probably going to roast me in the comments. But
Well, Mike, it sounds like you really love wrestling.
well, okay. So I'll tell you how I got into this topic. The topic that we're going to discuss today,
At some point.
is does our politics need love? And I think that's a pretty easy thing to say. It would almost be like, well, yeah, I think so. Now, maybe I'm just not interrogating my beliefs enough.
Well, that will happen shortly.
But out and out, we can't have two people in the same episode parroting the same belief.
Well, it's not that we can't. It's just that we don't like to.
We don't want to.
We're going to have a bit of conflict, of course.
So I'm going to be a contrarian today. I'm going to be the heel.
The heel. Does
Yeah.
that mean I get to be the face?
You were the face in this
I
episode.
always knew I was a face.
Yeah, well.
I had a face for
No,
faces.
you would be a face, and I'll explain to you why. Because you like knights and stuff like that. So you'd be a face that people could laugh at.
That's me, man. Oh.
You would be the face that we would be comfortable mocking.
Right.
Right.
What a shiny nerd.
Exactly.
Right. So you're gonna take the position then that we don't need love in politics.
No.
Is what you're saying.
No love. Down with love. Love is bad.
Right. Well, I suppose I'll have to disagree with you.
All right. So, as is our want, let's provide some context first. Let's just meander a little bit more, because that's what the listeners like. The listeners like the slow tease. That's what they're into.
Right, and
that's been our feedback so far.
Yeah.
Oh, and I forgot to mention, Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Yeah, Happy Valentine's Day.
So, you and your significant other can cuddle up tonight. Listen to schlubby podcasters.
And our dulcet tones.
Yeah. I hope you guys like wrestling and think it's romantic.
Oh, yeah. That's the best way to start off a Valentine's Day episode. So, love, right? So I think we're both comfortable with the broad Greek attempt to sketch out something about what love means.
Can you explain for the jury the broad Greek attempt at identifying and defining love?
Yeah, so basically I think there's an intuition, a basic human intuition that love is something of a complex thing.
Right.
In human life. And so if you're trying to think about it, if you're trying to turn your rational faculties towards it, then it bears a multifaceted analysis, right? It's hard to say, give a singular, uniform definition of what love is. So the Greeks, the Greek philosophers, and of course, they're not the only ones who took a view like this on love, but the Greeks had a multifaceted approach to defining parts of what love might be. And they have a few words for it. Some of which
about 6 are generally accepted as being ancient Greek words for love.
Right, 3 of which are the most popular, 3 of which are less popular, but some of them have actually filtered down through our cultural, into our cultural parlance, and even people who aren't acquainted with Greek philosophy have heard of these words before. So very basically, here are the sort of the most popular 3 and the least popular 3. The most popular 3 are philia, eros, and agape. Philia broadly means affectionate regard or friendship, but often between equals. Eros is a love of a more sexual nature, passion.
Right. Ergo, the term erotic.
Right, which is where the term erotic comes from.
Right.
And agape means love of a selfless kind, something of a charitable love, and in Western religions, it's often associated with love between God and their and His creatures,
right?
Specifically humans. The least
least
popular,
common. Yeah.
are storge, pragma, and philautia. Storge being a tenderness or affection that can be seen between parents and children. Pragma is a love that's, can be seen between a long married couple. And philautia is a kind of a self-love.
Right.
Which for one's own self.
I suspect is a term that would probably become more popular in today's parlance, if not for its awkward pronunciation.
Yeah, well, actually, you see a lot of books
about self-love.
In self-help and self-love is a quite a popular topic these days. So all these topics these definitions have their uses. But so when we say, does love belong in politics, or does our politics need love? What we mean is all those things, right? Or rather, maybe a more technical question would be, which of those kinds of expressions of love belong in politics?
Right, because to take another moment to tease this out a little bit more, oftentimes when you're listening to political rallies or politicians, or you're reading books about politics, there's the term love in the basic English sense is used, but it's used in a variety of contexts. So there's love for country, love for
right.
There's love for country, love for your countrymen, love for the military, love for justice, love for duty, all these things. But I think we can pretty fairly state that the modern political landscape appears to have very little love on either side. People, in point of fact, seem to have the utmost lack of love for, in particular, their opponents.
Well, I think there we see, as you said, we see a distinct lack of love and effort,
right,
for any kind of relationship that could be construed as one of those 6 kinds of love.
Right.
Though, love and it's also the case that there are all sorts of weird expressions of love in politics these days. Like, for example, who can forget Donald Trump hugging the flag?
I forgot about that.
Right? I mean, man, if that's not love, what is, right?
Right.
Or who can, love in the form of some kind of patriotic expression.
Right.
Is a common thing. Like, who can forget the outrage at the intentional lack of love allegedly shown by those professional sportsmen who took knees during the national anthems in America, right?
Right.
And and things like that, right? So
right.
So it's not to say that there isn't any examples of those 6 kinds of love shown in politics. Is that it's very confusing right now.
Right.
There's all sorts of different.
Right, and it also puts in the taking the knee example is a really interesting one because it draws into it brings into focus the competing interests of different loves that you might have. So you might have love for your community,
right,
or love for your group, which may be a subgroup, shall we say, of the broader national identity. And if the broader national identity is in opposition to, or perceived opposition to, the identity of your group, you may yet love your nation and your group, but find yourself having to make, shall we say, controversial stances.
Yeah.
One for the other. Or you can even interpret it as a kind of tough love, that you need to show a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? That you need to show opposition to better the group to which the larger national group to which you belong.
Yeah. So
that without these displays of, I'm not going to call them disrespect, that without these displays of criticism, there can be no betterment.
Well, yeah, you kind of describing a storge. What it sounds to me like storge, like a parent forcing their child to undergo some kind of suffering
Or
as a punishment to correct their behavior out in the motivation for their actions. The parents' actions is this
Right,
love
or-
of their child.
or even a love between equals.
Yeah,
Or even
yeah.
or even a love between equals.
Right, which is sometimes puts you in a position where you have to correct or rebuke
Right.
a friend.
Right.
Right. Well, and I think this is one of the interesting things that you run into if you accept the notion that we can analyze love in these 6 parts. Right? You run into the obvious question of what happens when these kinds of loves conflict.
Or intersect, or
Yeah.
yeah.
And how to decide between them. And I think, if I can say something that's probably pretty obvious, that's part of what makes love so difficult.
Right.
Is that it's a constant, it's often a constant struggle between deciding which to allow to win out, right? Do I let my agape win out against my philia right now, or do I allow my storge to win out against my eros or something like that? Like let's just say you haven't seen your wife for 6 months and you go home and but your children are in desperate need of your attention, and you have to make a decision between spending time with your child or spending time with your wife or something like that.
Right.
Right. Imagine, you can imagine any scenario, right? But what about politics? So I floated the idea to you, Mike, that all of these kinds of love have a place in politics.
They do, perhaps. But because I'm being a heel, I say no. I say no love. Bad. Love sucks. Hate is good.
Star Wars references. Go, go, go. I feel the hate swelling in you now.
Is that what he says? No, he says, let the hate flow through you.
No, it's when Luke is watching the destruction of the.
Oh yeah.
I think it's after the because there's the initial engagement with the TIE fighters, right? The TIE fighter fleet, and the Rebel fleet is holding more or less its own. But
Right.
then when the Star Destroyers start to, come in,
Right.
and they start to really be cut down, and I think as soon as the Star Destroyers come in, they pop the Death Star's first beam.
Doesn't the Death Star blow up a ship? I haven't seen
Yeah.
Return of the Jedi in a long time.
Yeah, it blows up a ship, and everybody's like, "Holy crap! I didn't know the Death Star could target ships."
Right.
Right, and that was their big morale attack. Right, not only did the Star Destroyers pop in, but then the Death Star blows up a ship with its beam, which is beyond and not only did they not think it was operational, but they had no idea that it could target
Right.
precision target moving ships.
Oh.
Right.
Okay. Right. Yeah, it's coming back to me now. I haven't seen Return of the Jedi
Yeah.
probably in 6 or 7 years.
It's got its moments. All in all, it's it's the worst of the 3, I think, for sure. But it has its moments.
Yeah.
That's definitely another episode.
Well, for Star Wars, right?
Yeah, so I think of the 6 kinds of love that we mentioned, I suspect that the most difficult to see its place in politics is philia. So maybe that's what we'll talk about.
Right.
Some
Now,
of-
if I'm not mistaken, the name Philadelphia is city of brotherly love.
yeah,
Now, let
correct.
me just
that is related to the word philia. Yeah.
right. Yes, nickname city of brotherly love
Mm-hmm.
comes from philos, ancient Greek word beloved, dear, and adelphos, brotherly.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. I always got confused with like Delphi.
Uh-huh.
Like maybe they just really loved the oracle at Delphi.
So it's the city of the love of the oracle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So philia. So we have a current problem in our politics right now, which everyone who's aware of politics knows, and that is that there's extreme polarization between political parties, and broadly speaking, between political positions, both those held in public and also those held, those held by the public and also those held by politicians. And I would argue, or I hope you would agree, that philia in politics chiefly concerns the love of one's political opponents. In the way that the love between brother and brother or sister and sister is a love of between equals, though their personalities, life choices, goals may differ.
Right. So there are a couple things about this to unpack. Number one, I suppose it depends on how you see your political opposition. Do you, for example, have love for your coworkers? Do you feel that love for your coworkers is essential to the practicing of whatever it is that you do? I mean, I suppose that if you see government as kind of an organization whose product is political output of one manner or another, then
it's very manufacturer-centric view there.
House of Commons is basically just a
Mike Smith.
It's just the House of Commons is really just a assembly plant for bills.
So here's the first point of our departure, because I would argue that the comparison you just made is not useful or accurate, because I don't believe that people who work in politics are co-workers as such in the way that you used it, because I do think there's a distinction between average everyday economic activity where your co-worker is, as you put it, just that. But I do think that politics has an importance to it that makes the people who are involved in politics more than merely just factory workers.
Okay.
Right. So therefore, because of the nature of the position, I think, because of its critical importance to everyone, I think it's more of a full. The work of politics is more involved, psychologically, ethically, than any average job. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
I would say that my off-the-cuff comparison between the House of Commons and a factory probably requires a little more time in the oven, certainly. So there's that. But before we started recording this episode, we did actually find a real point of contention, which is the question of whether or not your political opposition is acting in good faith, and whether or not the actions that they are performing are regarded, at least by them, as morally justifiable on the grounds of the beliefs that they legitimately and honestly hold.
Right.
So do you want to unpack that a little bit? Maybe.
Yeah. So one of my favorite political pundits, correspondents, he happens to be a socialist, but he's a long-term he's a long-term politician, and he's held his particular political positions for his whole career, and circumstantially, his career in politics has been a tumultuous one. Surprise, surprise. But I make those provisos because he is completely disenamored. That's probably a better word for that. With his opposition, such that he has no love at all for his political opponents, and he believes fundamentally that his political opponents are ethical enemies of him. That part of his job as a politician is to oppose fundamentally the actions and aims of his political opponents, because those opponents and their aims are fundamentally harmful.
Right.
Though he will admit to having professional respect for the offices wherein his opponents hold. Right. Like when you're a member of parliament, you are a person, but you also hold an office.
Right.
right? And so insofar as that person holds the office, he feels he can have professional respect for that office, but not for their political position. And anyway, so I make that that laborious narrative to set the table for me, saying that I've always thought this is not good. I think his this seems to me to be a view which is completely reasonable given a lifetime in politics, right? A lifetime on the
Right.
battlefield, right? How many veterans of World War I and World War II can look at a German soldier or an American soldier, say, and with complete sort of
Unqualified love.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, yeah. You've learned through harsh experience, or some kind of enmity towards that person, right? So this is to say that I'm not saying that is, I'm shocked that we would hold that opinion, but I think we can also say that opinion is not necessarily good,
Right.
right? Even if it's understandable,
Even if it's
Right.
perfectly intelligible,
right?
nonetheless, it has certain, shall we say, defects or.
Well, it
certain-
may.
Yeah.
This is what I would argue, not least because in our political organizations, which are representative democracies, part of what makes for the good functioning of those systems is the appropriate relationships of those professionals who are in those systems.
Right.
And it would seem to me that fundamental enmity for those who hold an opposed political view would harm the good functioning of the mechanisms of state, or could harm,
Right.
such that it would diminish it.
Right.
Not least, it would give you emotional reasons for potentially acting in a less than harmonious way,
Right,
for
because-
their opposition or destruction.
That's right, because if you are acting in good faith, if you are espousing political views of your own, which you have arrived at by means of honest consideration and thoughtful reflection, presumably you wish to perform the act of governing in a manner that strengthens your nation. Perhaps you have an opinion such as someone like Steve Bannon, in which you want to, quote unquote, dismantle the administrative state. But you do that if you are acting in good faith with the belief that in so doing, you actually strengthen, as he might put it, the common man.
Right.
Right. So when you see somebody acting counter to that, it's certainly tempting, if not the default belief, that the person is acting in a manner which is innately counterproductive to the good governance of your nation.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. And so I'm going to bring it. I'm going to try to make the analogy, or to make an analogy close to the personal, to illustrate this point.
Okay.
I think one of the things that husbands and wives have to learn is one of these fundamental truths about human disagreement, and that's this: that unfortunately for human beings, there are certain topics and questions in life that are so complex that two people with completely identical intellects and acting with good motivations can come to completely opposite conclusions about the same topic.
Right.
Right? And so this can happen between a husband and a wife.
Right.
And oftentimes, and I say this with personal experience, great disagreements can result when one side does not recognize that one can be a reasonable person and take the other side's point of view.
Right.
Right? And in so allowing for that, I think that in and of itself can resolve the conflict.
Right.
right? And so blowing it right back up to political controversy, I think it's a mistake for someone to conclude prima facie that only one reasonable interpretation can be achieved on any given complex issue. Therefore, if someone does take a different view, that person has to be either ignorant or acting nefariously.
Right. And that's an important point to make, because especially as politics has gotten into the realm of intellectualism versus anti-intellectualism, and charges have been laid against one side or the other that they are acting in a manner which is opposed to intellectual inquiry. The notion that somebody could be nonetheless very intelligent and acting in good faith, but nonetheless pursue a platform that you find to be in utter contrast to your own. That's kind of a radical notion.
Well, it is a radical notion, not least because I think for normal people, it begs the question, if another intelligent person can think something that I disagree with, maybe they're right? Or what do they know that I don't?
Yeah,
Right?
it's a good way to really hit at somebody's sense of confidence, self-confidence,
Yeah,
in their ability as a political actor.
right.
Right. And I think that's probably what gives the pushback against people with whom we disagree so much of its character and so much of its force.
Yeah.
That to disagree with us is broadly perceived as being an attack on our ability to think clearly about a subject.
Right, and also again to bring it back, so I've been married for around a year or over a year, so I don't know if I can say things that I've learned about marriage yet, but something else about arguments between spouses, right, is this notion of personal worth affixed to propositions. Right? If you're the kind of person where your personal worth is sort of, is screwed into a particular intellectual or political proposition,
Right.
then you're at risk of feeling personal attack if that proposition is opposed.
Yeah.
Right? Where a personal attack may not have been the intent of the opposition.
It may not even be
Right.
recognized
Right.
as having occurred by the opposition.
That's right.
They might not even realize they're attacking you.
That's
or
right.
perceive to be attacking you.
That's right. That's right. And that can turn what could potentially be a discussion centered around some kind of political proposition, some kind of policy decision, or some kind of intellectual conversation. It can turn it to a question of character,
Right.
right? Which can easily escalate and degenerate. And this happens just as easily, I think, in personal or interpersonal conversation as it does on the floor of Parliament. Right?
And what is the floor of Parliament but interpersonal communication writ large?
Right. Well, right. With infinitely higher stakes in a way.
Yes.
Right? So all this around philia, right? So I think the relationship of opposing equals, right, brothers, sisters, is a simple example. The relationship, sort of the professional relationship of politicians, I think mirrors this to some degree. And I would argue that, as I said earlier, that the gravity of the situation necessitates some kind of effort to maintain that positive relationship of philia, where the breakdown of that relationship is harmful. On the other hand, we haven't talked about one unfortunate regular aspect of politics and personal relationships, and that's nefarious actors.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets. This is where my free love and peace
Gets complicated.
theories gets complicated.
And this is where I make my heel entrance.
That's right.
Probably to like Kid Rock or something, and like there's like explosions going off and stuff.
Taking care of business.
My name is Kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just take a pause for a moment before we get to this, and just recap for our listeners how we got to this place.
Right.
So we started off with a discussion of love, the 6 definitions of love as espoused by the Greeks, and narrowed it down to about 3 that are in most common parlance. So you've got philia, eros, and agape. And at this point, we started discussing the kinds of love that you hear talked about in our modern political discussion. So it's like love for country. And then we also noted that you can that different types of love or love for different groups can find themselves at loggerheads because of competing interests or because of different loyalties. Okay. So that means that in our broad political discussion, there's already a problem with the way that we think about love, to the extent that love is not a uniform thing and is not applied equally.
Right.
So from there, we get to love for your, I believe it was philia.
Philia, that's right.
Which is love for people on an equal footing, and how that would affect relations between politicians, in our case, members of the House of Commons. So I think we arrived at a conclusion that that love is possible, if not preferable, in or something to be desired in situations where your opposition, let's say, is acting in good faith, and even if they disagree with you on grounds that they believe to be moral.
Yeah, a principal grounds, acting in good faith, all things being equal.
Right.
Yeah.
But in an era of lobbying and corporate intervention and problems with financing, the question invariably becomes, is the politician, is your opposition acting in good faith? Or have they been compromised? Are they espousing a view that they might not? Are they doing a real Michael heel turn here and espousing a view that they may not necessarily believe in, but which is required in the situation due to outside forces?
Right.
For example, lobbying, in my case, the requirements of a podcast episode, important questions like that.
Well, so I think there's lots of places where distrust can originate in professional politics. One of which is the simple fallacy that one cannot take an opposing view and still be a reasonable person.
And at the risk of providing too dour a mood for what ought to be our Valentine's Day episode, Happy Valentine's Day.
Oh, we already did Happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah, we're going to do it again. Happy Valentine's Day.
Oh, yeah. Happy Valentine's Day.
Just in case you missed it.
Yeah. Or Happy Singles Day for whatever those of you who...
Well, that's self-love.
Are drinking. Yeah, that's right.
You are dating yourself today.
Yeah.
You are dating yourself today. It's important to be kind to yourself.
It's true. It's very true.
Where was I going with this? Right. Yes. As is often the case in politics, so it is in personal relationships. And that's how you can tie it back into politics. Happy Valentine's Day. Is that the thing that really starts to break down a romantic relationship or a professional relationship or a political relationship is distrust.
That's right.
As soon as you start to wonder whether or not your partner is acting not in good faith, or if they have something to hide, or if they're lying or being distrustful.
That's right.
That's what kills a relationship every single time. It begins with a kernel. of distrust, and it blossoms into a big tree of hate. It's a little seed, and then it's a big red wood of get out of my apartment.
It's like the thumping tree in Harry Potter.
Right, yeah. The Whomping Willow.
Whomping Willow, what did I say? Thumping
Willow.
tree? Yeah.
A thumping tree.
Yeah, that's close enough.
Yeah.
I still had
I'm pretty sure that was like a first draft name for it.
The thumping tree?
Yeah.
Yeah. The alliteration's not quite as good.
No.
But yeah, so another source of mistrust can come from tribalism.
Well, it's worse than mistrust. It's distrust.
Well, right.
If I mistrust you, I trust you in error. If I distrust you, I don't trust you.
Right. That is correct.
Right.
I need to improve.
But see, even mistrust can tie into this in its own weird way, that you worry that you mistrust somebody,
right? No, of course,
and that leads to distrust.
Right.
So you didn't make
Very good.
mistake. You just didn't qualify it.
Right. There you go. Thank you for qualifying it in my wake.
Right.
So if you perceive, and this is often accused, or this accusation is often leveled against career politicians.
Right.
Where if you perceive that a politician is making an argument for not out of their own particular personal principle, but out of their party affiliation, like it's the line they have to take.
Okay.
Then coupled with the simultaneous analysis that the line is harmful, right? It's given you oppose the line. What that means is that you're looking at a person who is taking a harmful line for tribal purposes.
Right.
Which breeds contempt.
Right.
Like, you hear this from socialists a lot. You're only lowering taxes, you Tory, because that's your position, even though you know that the public purse requires more money. And even though you know that a 1% raise on the richest 10% of Canadians or of whatever will fund that raise.
Right. Whereas if you read the YouTube comment section of certain videos, you may find the opposite position, that socialists only want to raise taxes because
that's what you do as a socialist.
Yeah, because you are opposed in principle to, I don't know, the very notion of wealth.
But see, that's okay. So maybe this is maybe you should say this for later. I'm going to say it now. I think that is the point of departure here, is the word principle, or at least
you've noted a number of areas of departure.
Well, okay, so
I think it's about the third time in the episode where you say, that is the area of departure. Well, like, when is this plane going to take off?
We're grounded. We're grounded. This is a runway party. Did you get the invitation?
No.
I'll get the champagne. The problem with trust is it's built over time.
Right. You do not prima facie trust somebody. Am I using the word prima facie correctly?
Yeah, you can, but practical terms have proven that naive in the political realm, because trust is easily misused, right?
Right.
So trust is most efficiently built over time. And what most efficiently builds trust, I would argue, is a consistent articulation of an unwavering principle. And so if one operates in one's political career according to the consistent articulation of a broad principle, which one holds to, then if one makes a decision and another decision in accordance with that principle, one's opponents will struggle to find an obvious reason why that decision could be nefarious, or could be, lazy, or could be mean-spirited, or any other thing, right? Rather than what is in principle laudable, which is holding to your convictions, right? And given that you're a good actor, right? In the reverse, if you don't have a history of holding to a particular principle, then there's no history of good faith in your political action. Then even if in any given case, you make some kind of altruistic argument for a particular policy or principle, there's nothing to back you up for your opponents. There's no overriding history for your opponents to say, well, obviously you're just acting with your beliefs, right? What are they going to know, or how are they going to tell? And it's because they often mistrust or distrust you immediately, just in principle, because politics tends to be a distrustful business. You're more likely to be automatically distrusted if you have no history of acting towards a principle. And this is where I think we find most people. Right? I think part of what creates this, part of what works against the possibility of philia existing between political parties is the constant availability, or rather the constant weakness that party members have against the charge of being a nefarious actor of some kind.
Right. I mean,
does that make sense?
Well, to counterpoint that, the idea of a consistent record, or what is perceived to be a consistent record that is perceived to be acting in good faith, I mean, it is worth questioning the extent to which that is really necessary. Going back to a previous discussion that we had whether or not you need to be effective as a leader, it may well be, we probably haven't aired that episode yet, it may well be that in the pursuit of politics, we ought to expect that any leader, whoever they may be, would act in a manner in which they are called upon on numerous occasions to compromise what they ought to, what they regard as being the moral action to suit a broader, in the particular, to suit a broader general moral aim. So I don't think people who are elected to lead a nation, whether it's Canada or wherever, do so with the aim of foreign policy in mind. But
well, I'm not meaning. I don't mean just strictly foreign policy.
No, but foreign policy is a really good flashpoint because it's so theoretical for most people that I think it actually makes it more likely to fuel strong reactions.
I suppose.
Right? And so the point I was making there is that you might be elected to be Prime Minister of Canada, but find that in being Prime Minister of Canada, no matter how much you want to be domestically minded at all times, you have these foreign policy concerns. And in the world of espionage and counterintelligence and counterterrorism and things like that, you find yourself making morally questionable decisions in the particular, but with the broader aim of protecting your nation, let's say.
Well.
So, in that case, it calls into question the necessity of what is perceived to be a consistent record, at least insofar as consistent record is a kind of numerical breakdown of your decisions. Well, do you know what I mean by that? Like, it's.
I guess so. So, are you trying to say that basically? This is gonna sound more cynical than you put it, but are you trying to argue that philia is a utopian goal? Like the philia between political opponents is a utopian goal, not least because the things that would prove foundational for that relationship are nearly impossible to achieve in politics?
Well, any time that you operate in good faith in politics, you operate, I would argue, and I don't mean this to sound cynical, I mean this in the most morally neutral sense possible, but you act in a manner that is utopian. To the extent that you aren't operating in a manner where you are just getting by. You have an aim, you have a moral sense of what's right and wrong. You have an idea of what you want your country to be or your city to be, your province or wherever. and your actions are directed towards that aim. Or maybe even that's too large an assumption.
I don't know. Well, so I want to return to nefarious actors a bit because
Okay.
I want to try and shift some blame on them for this whole sort of situation we're talking around. Right, I do believe that there are true and honest politicians out there.
I suspect that at least in politically stable countries, countries with relatively low levels of corruption, most people operate in a manner they regard to be as
Oh, I won't go that far.
good faith. That's my suspicion. But again, going back to the point that I made earlier, they might nonetheless compromise on the particulars.
Well, right. Well, so okay.
A love of power does not lend itself in one way or another to a particular morality, and it's not so. You can love power if the.
I mean, you can you can want to wear the ring to do good.
Yes, you can be a Green Lantern.
A green? You mean a green Gandalf?
Yeah.
I guess logically it's possible. Well, okay, so
for a socialist, you are deeply
What?
distrustful of government.
well, okay, so let me articulate that a little bit, right? It's hard to love in a relationship where there's constant, renewed reasons for distrust. So in a family, if there's an actor in that family which is continually continually abusing the trust of others, it puts those others in a difficult position because they're already obligated by their family relationship to work to achieve a level of trust in that family member. And that obligation does not fade with time. But that family member is constantly doing things which show that they ought not to have been trusted. So it puts the family in a very, very extremely difficult position. And I believe that the electorate, certainly since Vietnam, I think, maybe earlier, but I think the Western electorate has often been put in this position, far too often.
I think probably the more. Keep going.
And such that trust in the political establishment, regardless of who's in it, and this is the problem. Trust in the establishment, in the system, is very low, and it's low because of experience, right? And people don't forget that too much. I mean, and it isn't going away either. I mean, we're living through the Trump years right now. I mean, can you imagine what kind of a historical effect that's going to have on the American electorate, regardless of what position you take on him, right? What will his effect be on the system, right? This is one of the things you risk with extreme political positions, right? And a Barack Obama as well, right? Just to take two obvious examples, right? He ran on a platform of hope and change, and regardless of how you slice it, he did not live up to, in real terms, what his promises were. Now, of course, you can debate about whether or not that was the Republicans' fault, or whether that's whatever, blah, blah, blah. It's still, in real terms, right? If you say you're going to go get groceries for your wife, and you don't come back with groceries, 6 times in a row, whether or not each time there was a different excuse that had nothing to do with you. I mean, your wife's still going to wonder whether she should trust you to go and get groceries.
Yeah.
It's just how it is.
Right.
Right? And so what I'm trying to say here is that while I am arguing that philia is extremely important and necessary for the proper functioning of our political systems, I'm recognizing that the constant mistrust that is built in our political systems makes that potentially impossible, right? And now I was just talking about love between the electorate and the system, or the system to the electorate. Okay, that's another thing, right? But politicians are still part of the electorate. In any case, so that might mean that I'm just trying to make the argument that love is hard,
Yeah. And love requires forgiveness, which is an important part of it. You have to be able to forgive people for their transgressions.
Let's talk about that. I'm glad you mentioned that. I would have been
just glossed right over it.
Beside myself if we had forgotten to talk about that. Yeah, forgiveness. So let me put this question to you then, Mike.
Before let's deepen it. Let's really get this pot brewing, because we mentioned earlier the importance of self-love and how it's become an industry of its own, in a sense, with self-help books and things like that.
Yeah, it sure has.
It's worth asking the extent to which our lack of forgiveness for people and our impassioned, fiery political rhetoric is connected to growing rates of depression and lack of self-love. And perhaps we can't forgive people, and more poignantly cannot forgive ourselves. And this vicious emotional cycle in which we find ourselves of making mistakes and trying to learn from them, but sabotaging ourselves because we can't forgive ourselves is reflected in a broader political discourse.
Well, I mean, let's bring in another very poignant family example, right? It is the case that in divorces, the children often go through as much or more emotional turmoil as the parents do.
Correct.
And often including, this is with the children, blaming themselves in part or in whole for the circumstances of the divorce.
Right.
Right. And I think you've diagnosed it exactly right. I think that there's definitely an element of that in the electorate, in our political systems, where the electorate, seeing the turmoil of their parents, if you will, at grasping at straws to understand its world and to understand the source of the turmoil, like a child, is, becomes self-reflective and needing someone to blame often blames itself.
Well, even deeper,
right?
There's the notion or perception, earned or unearned, accurate or inaccurate, that we live in a world that increasingly demands perfection of you, you personally, and is intolerant of your mistakes or of your shortcomings or of the disadvantages that you bring to the plate. And as we feel that pressure on us, so we reflect it back on our political system, in which we do not tolerate failure from our politicians, or lapses of judgment, or mistakes, or inconsistencies,
or our fellow electorate.
Right.
And, a family with multiple children, you might have different children blaming other children for the circumstances of the family's breakup.
Right. Even if that is completely irrational.
That's
even
right.
if that is,
That's right. And you can have that happen regardless of the circumstances of the separation, even if it's amicable, right? Just because the nature of separation, the nature of that kind of high-level discord, it creates discord at the lower levels, right? And so too our politics.
Right.
Right.
So the I can't say eagle-eyed because you don't see us, dear listener, but eagle-eared, fox-eared. What's the thing that hears well?
The fennec foxes.
Yeah.
Those desert foxes with the big ears.
The big ears and the cute faces.
Yeah.
So for all you fennec foxes out there, you may have just noticed that I let slip that actually I do think we need love in politics, because one of the positions about which I'm most passionate actually is self-love, and how we as a culture seem to be discouraging self-love, but also encouraging self-love. And so we have this weird love-hate relationship with ourselves, and this gets reflected back onto our politics. But I'm the heel, so I have to get back to my position.
No. Well, so let me.
I have to say, this is good. This hate is good. It's good.
Strike me down with all of your hatred. Give in to your anger.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's good. Not yes. Come on. Or is that a new thing?
That's a Mike thing. That's just what I'm doing.
Is that a Snoke thing? Oh, okay.
No, I don't care about Snoke.
Who is Snoke anyway? I digress.
No one cares.
Nobody cares. Well, so to continue to draw comparisons, I think often in the self-love business, in the self-help business, the thesis is put forth that, if you will, the draw the wagons around the campfire kind of strategy, where, all right, so nobody cares about you, you don't even care about you, but we're going to change all of this.
Well, it might be worse than that, right? It might be worse than that. It's that you might hate you.
Right. And so they'll say, we're going to change this. The only person you need to care about you is you, and you're enough. So draw the wagons around yourself. You can be enough for yourself, and that's it, right?
In my opinion, having my own bouts of depression in the past, I would say that's not even the worst thing that happens. The worst thing that happens is that in hating yourself, you see the good in other people, see it lacking in you, and then the possibility for resentment spikes.
Right.
And resentment in a relationship is one of the worst things that can crop up. If you're constantly the one who's buying the groceries, or if you're the one who's constantly coming home early to take care of the kids, or anything like that, or you're the one who's making all the financial decisions, you might resent what you perceive to be the lack of participation on the part of someone else who, despite their lack of participation, nonetheless reaps the rewards of your efforts, in a manner that you deem to be unearned.
Right. Regardless of the circumstances which create that. Right.
Regardless of even whether or not it's true.
Right. That's right.
Right. Resentment is.
That's right.
And boy, does there seem to be a lot of that these days.
Right. And
resentment of ourselves, resentment towards others, resentment towards the political system.
Yeah.
It might be earned.
Well, so I think the most.
It might not be.
Well, I think the most reasonable answer here is the some sort of Aristotelian mean, where we acknowledge that most certainly, some of it is earned, and also most certainly some of it is not.
Fair.
It might be seen as a dodge, but it isn't. And I say that as someone who does have passionate political views, and because I know what some of you are thinking. Some of you with passionate political views, with passionate moral views, and again, I'll reference my favorite political pundit, who's also extremely passionate about his political positions. You know, you're so passionate that you're unwilling to tolerate the failure of your political opponents, and even those who ostensibly hold your position, because you demand an immediate resolution to these to the issues which you care about, right? And you're willing to hold everyone to account to the fullest extent if it will solve the problem, right? And while I can appreciate the motive for this, what I think it glosses over is the nature of the relationship, right? Like to make another personal analogy, you know, you can have a spouse which errs beyond reasonable humanity, right? Like, I don't know, if someone cheats on you or something, or someone does something crazy, right? And you can have strict justice demand full restitution of that situation, which can include destruction of the relationship and other relationships which are connected to that, and all that, and all the rest of it, right? But nevertheless, you can still have a situation where mercy is involved as well, and you mentioned forgiveness, and where it's beneficial to forego complete restitution, complete justice, to continue this relationship, right? And I think in politics, as you said, I think this is why forgiveness is so important. Despite the fact that political decisions have such gravitas, right? People die and people suffer because of political decisions, and yet the breakdown of that political relationship between political parties and between the system and its people is even worse, because that's the only thing that's keeping everything going. I would argue, right? And so inevitably you're going to have to find some moment to have some forgiveness with those nefarious actors, but also maybe forgiveness for yourself if you realize that you've misassumed someone's intentions, right? Or you've blamed someone that ought not to have been blamed for this or that, or you've acted in anger out of just emotion, but what those particular moments of forgiveness are, right? That's another matter, right? That's a very tough question.
So before we, we might need to add this to the beginning of the episode.
Sure.
But we haven't really discussed yet why it's important to love in politics. Or maybe this is what we can tackle right now.
Yeah, we can tackle.
All of this is working on an assumption, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your whole position is working on an assumption that you need love in politics, or that we need more love in politics. Love belongs in politics. You got to love people. But why?
Well, I guess the argument that I've made, I didn't explicitly intend to make it when we started the podcast, but I guess the argument I've ended up making is that insofar as politics is a reflection
of the family,
our basic human relationships,
right?
That if we allow for the fact that love is necessary in our basic human relationships, then it seems to follow to me that it is necessary in some degree in our political relationships as well, and in the functioning of government.
But of course, there is a difference between it may well be premised on it as being a reflection of our most integral human relationships, but the size and scope of government, in point of fact, eclipses any human relationship that we meaningfully have in our day-to-day lives, which means that, in point of fact, they are two very, very different things.
Yeah,
so
I'll grant that. I'll grant that, yeah.
So I think it stands to reason that while it may nonetheless be premised or based on the most integral of human relationships, politics does not benefit from being held to those same standards, or is not meaningfully made better.
Well, so
again, totally in keeping with my heel persona.
Well, we did talk about this briefly.
Hate tattooed on my chest.
Yeah. Well, I was the heel last time. We did talk about this briefly before, that there's a necessary antagonistic relationship between the siblings in our political system, between the political parties, right? And so perhaps the one of the differences between the sibling relationship in a family, the philia relationship in a family, and the philia relationship in politics, is that the philia relationship in the family is not obviously and immediately predicated on some kind of antagonistic discourse. So, Mike, do you accept that? Like, does that mean that?
I mean, I think the obvious argument in favor for you would be that regardless of the regardless of the antagonism or as evidenced by the antagonism, the need for philia arises from the recognition of a common general goal, which is arrived at by different paths.
Right. Yeah, I hope that's an attractive premise.
And I would think that for somebody who has played on team sports like you or I, that would have been more easily available as an example to grasp at. But
well, you know what? Seeing as we're winding down, I'm going to end by shifting more towards your position.
Okay.
And
try it on for size.
Well, no, but I'm gonna accept some cynical reality to the situation. I think, which is uncharacteristic of me. I'm going to admit of the fact that it certainly seems as if our current political system being what it is, that it's very difficult to tell these days whether or not a political figure is a principled actor or whether they're acting nefariously. I think it's a very difficult thing in general for intelligent people to tell, much less people who are less equipped to make those decisions, right? Not everybody is able to tell to the same degree. And I'm also willing to admit that our political system is awash in many things which encourage its corruption, not least being money and personal capital. So in this situation then, though I might believe that love is important to have in politics, and right, we only talked about really philia today, right? We didn't talk about agape really, or even eros, which I do believe has some place to play in politics. Maybe that'll be for next year's episode. But
next year's?
Yeah.
What's next year?
Next Valentine's Day.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
I thought we were really scaling back our release schedule.
Yeah. No, but I'm willing to admit that that politics seems to be an extremely dirty game right now, and being so vulnerable and naive as to allow for, a kind of trust and love in politics seems difficult, right? And I wouldn't necessarily blame anyone for not taking that view out of fear of being taken advantage of.
I would like to say more about this topic because I think that we touched on a couple of things that require a little bit more insight, or at least investigation, namely the way that we deal with people who do not act in good faith. And the reason why I say that is because we also discussed the importance of consistency and veracity in regards to how we evaluate politicians. But in addition to that, we also talked about forgiveness, love of self, and love of others. And I suspect that we haven't done enough to connect the dots from forgiveness to how we treat those who do not act in good faith.
No, I agree. I agree very much so.
And the reason why I think that's especially important is because in having this discussion and in talking about politics as a kind of expanded or blown up version of a family, I wonder if, and of course also in connection with that, the problems of thinking about politics as an expanded family unit, I wonder if the reason why we lack philia in our politics is because of its size and, by extension, its consequential impersonality. Right? It's much easier to feel love for brothers, let's say, than it is to feel love for somebody who lives on the moon, let's say.
Sure.
Far and far away from you.
Sure.
And, just as an editor's note to all of this, we ought to mention that in the city-states that gave birth to Greek philosophy and by extension Western philosophy, populations typically did not exceed a couple. Well, it would have been something closer to like, let's say 50,000 at most.
If you mean the with respect to the formations of, say, Greek, like Athenian democracy and,
Right.
and ideas like that, yes, absolutely, and we definitely are going to do an episode about that, because I think we both have this intuition that maybe democracy might have a size limit. To it, right?
Well, it's not necessarily a size
Right.
limit, but certainly a problem with size.
Sure. Yeah.
The groundworks of which having been laid out by an Athenian voting class
Right.
that was maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people, 2,000 or 3,000 land-holding, educated men
Right.
at most.
Right.
Which is one of the reasons why we don't have direct democracy in Canada, certainly.
Right.
When you have a population approaching 40 million, it's impossible to have that much interface with your political system.
Well, but then again, there's the internet, right? So I mean, that's also
Another topic.
It's a wildcat factor. But no, there's so much more to say in this topic, not least because if we're going to talk about the difference between love and the size of your family, size of your between love and the size of your family, what does that mean for globalization?
Right.
Is that, if we were to admit of those ideas that, that we're kind of glossing over, that maybe love has a practical family size limit, right?
Well, back to the
is it globalized sort of human consciousness even possible, right? Which many believe is the case, right?
Well, back to the notion of self-love and self-forgiveness. Not to demean our listeners here, but it is important to note that the human brain is a relatively primitive thing.
Well, maybe yours and mine. I don't know about.
Certainly not our listeners, who I would like to mention have excellent tastes and are cultured in the highest sense. But that having been said, I have read before that your average person is capable of recognizing and naming about 250 faces.
Right. I've also read that,
Yeah, which is about roughly the size of a tribe, let's say, in a pre-agricultural society. So we're working with some outdated hardware. So if you find yourself incapable of fully understanding somebody who lives thousands of miles away from you, don't be too harsh on yourself. Acknowledge that it might be that you don't understand that person, and acknowledge that you have a lot to learn, but also be kind to yourself.
We have limits. That is no doubt true.
So do you have any final happy Valentine's Day messages for our well-cultured listeners?
Yeah. Don't put chocolate in a microwave. That's a bad idea. Or at least if you're going to try to melt chocolate, make sure that you do it precisely as instructed, because I think the first Valentine's Day I had with my wife, I tried to do, I got her her favorite things. I got her Pizza Hut pizza and some sushi, I think, and a bunch of stuff. And then I tried to make chocolate-covered strawberries. And I just bought some chocolate and tried to melt it. I think it was like milk chocolate or something. Tried to melt it in a microwave. And I was under the impression that the hotter it got, the more liquid it would get, because that makes sense, right? Well, apparently chocolate is liquid to a very small point, and then it becomes hard as a rock, and you literally burn the liquid out of it, right? So,
no.
Yeah, so what I did was I tried to melt some chocolate, and I burned the crap out of it, and I made it basically hard as rocks and unusable. I ruined like 3/4 of my chocolate. And so,
upon closer inspection, I suddenly have to change my plans.
But of course, my wife, recognizing my fundamental incompetence, and she forgave me. We had a great Valentine's Day. So may that be a lesson to all you couples out there.
Would-be Casanovas.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Well, that just about wraps things up. All right, everybody, have a happy Valentine's Day.
Yep.
And catch us next week. We're looking forward to it.
Yep, it's going to be great. Now, about the WWE, if you know that the stories are made up, like how can you...
Okay, so here's my theory about how it works.
Like,
I'm just going to hedge you off right now because I think I see where this is going. This is the way that I interpret. Okay, so I saw. Hi, I'm Mike. The other guy's Aaron.
and you've been listening to Thought Fuzz.
If you like the show, tell your friends. If you didn't like the show, tell your enemies that you did. And don't forget to rate us wherever you heard this.
Follow us and continue the conversation on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Check out our show notes for all the links.
And finally, we'd like to say thank you to our listeners for supporting us. We couldn't do this without you.
Until next time, keep it fuzzy.